The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravenshollow Palace as King Edmund Aldridge stood before the towering windows of his private study. His weathered hands gripped a crystal tumbler of scotch, though the clock had barely struck 9. The weight of 43 years on the throne pressed heavily upon his shoulders, but today carried a burden unlike any other in his long reign. Behind him, scattered across his mahogany desk, lay photographs that would forever change the course of the Aldridge dynasty. Each image told a story of deception so profound that Edmund felt his very foundation crumbling beneath him. His wife of 27 years, Queen Cordelia, stared back at him from those damning photographs, her face illuminated by the soft glow of candlelight in what appeared to be an intimate dinner setting. But it wasn't the romantic ambience that made Edmund's blood run cold. It was the man sitting across from her. Lord Marcus Blackwood, his most trusted advisor and childhood friend, held Cordelia's hands across the table in one photograph. In another, their lips met in a passionate embrace. The timestamp on each image stretched back over 2 years, revealing a betrayal that had been festering in the very heart of his kingdom while Edmund remained blissfully unaware. The irony wasn't lost on him. For decades, the tabloids had speculated about his own alleged affairs, painting him as an unfaithful husband while Cordelia played the role of the wronged but dignified queen. The public adored her, the elegant woman who had transformed from a commoner into royalty with grace and poise. She had become the people's queen, their Diana, their symbol of what was good and pure about the monarchy. Meanwhile, Edmund had been cast as the cold, distant king who preferred his horses and hunting to his wife's company. But the truth, as these photographs revealed, was far more complex and infinitely more devastating. Edmund's private secretary, James Whitmore, had delivered the envelope just after dawn. The man's usually composed demeanor had cracked as he placed the package on the king's desk with trembling hands. "Your Majesty," James had whispered, "these arrived by special courier an hour ago. There's also this." He had handed Edmund a letter written on expensive cream-colored stationery. The letter was brief but chilling in its implications. "Your Majesty, these images represent only a small sample of what we possess. Queen Cordelia's relationship with Lord Blackwood has been extensively documented over the past 24 months. Should you wish to prevent their public release, we require your immediate consideration of our terms. You have 72 hours to respond. A representative will contact you soon. No signature, no return address, no indication of who held this sword over his head." Edmund had dismissed James immediately, needing solitude to process the magnitude of what lay before him. The photographs weren't grainy surveillance shots that could be dismissed as doctored or taken out of context. They were professional quality images, clearly taken by someone with access to private venues and intimate moments. The detail was so precise that Edmund could see the inscription on Cordelia's wedding ring in several shots, the same ring he had placed on her finger during their fairy tale wedding that had been watched by 2 billion people worldwide. As he studied each image, memories flooded back with painful clarity. The late-night meetings between Cordelia and Blackwood that she had explained as charity work planning. The weekend trips to their country estate when Blackwood would coincidentally need to discuss urgent matters of state with the Queen. The way Cordelia's eyes would light up when Blackwood entered a room, a brightness that Edmund realized he hadn't seen directed at him in years. The most damning photograph showed them in what appeared to be a private library, books scattered around them as they lay together on an antique Persian rug. Cordelia's dress was disheveled, Blackwood's shirt unbuttoned. The intimacy of the moment was undeniable, but what struck Edmund most was the expression on his wife's face. Pure joy and abandon, emotions he hadn't witnessed in their own private moments for longer than he cared to remember. Edmund's mind raced through the potential implications. If these images became public, the scandal would rock the monarchy to its core. The institution he had devoted his life to preserving would be irreparably damaged. Public trust, already fragile in an age where the relevance of royalty was constantly questioned, would likely never recover. The line of succession would be called into question. Their children, Prince Alexander and Princess Victoria, would bear the burden of their parents' scandal for the rest of their lives. But beyond the political ramifications lay a personal devastation that cut deeper than any threat to the crown. Edmund had genuinely loved Cordelia, even when their marriage had grown distant and formal. He had attributed their emotional separation to the pressures of royal life, the endless scrutiny, the weight of duty that left little room for spontaneous affection. He had convinced himself that beneath the protocol and public performances, they still shared something real and enduring. These photographs shattered that illusion completely. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside his study caused Edmund to quickly gather the photographs and slip them back into their envelope. A gentle knock followed, and Cordelia's voice called out softly, "Edmund, may I come in?" For a moment, he stood frozen, envelope in hand, staring at the door that separated him from the woman who had just destroyed his world. Part of him wanted to fling the door open and demand an explanation, to watch her face as he confronted her with the evidence of her betrayal. But another part, the part that had been trained since childhood to maintain dignity in the face of crisis, urged restraint. "Of course," he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. He slipped the envelope into his desk drawer just as she entered. Cordelia appeared as elegant as ever in a cream-colored silk blouse and navy skirt, her auburn hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. She moved with the practiced grace that had made her a favorite subject of fashion magazines worldwide. But as she approached his desk, Edmund noticed something he had missed before, or perhaps had chosen not to see. There was a lightness in her step, a subtle glow to her complexion that spoke of contentment and fulfillment. "You're up early," she observed, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "James mentioned you had urgent correspondence to attend to." Edmund studied her face, searching for any sign of guilt or awareness that her secret had been exposed. But Cordelia's expression remained serene, even slightly concerned for his welfare. She was either an exceptional actress, or she genuinely had no idea that her affair had been discovered. "State matters," he replied vaguely. "Nothing that can't wait." They sat in silence for several moments, the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them like a physical presence. Edmund found himself cataloging details about his wife that he had taken for granted for years. The way she unconsciously twisted her wedding ring when nervous, the slight upturn of her lips when she was deep in thought, the way morning light caught the gold highlights in her hair. "Edmund," she began, her voice carrying a note of hesitation that was unusual for her. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, about taking some time away. Perhaps a private retreat, somewhere we can reconnect without the constant demands of public life." The irony of her suggestion was almost too much to bear. Here she was, proposing a romantic getaway to repair their marriage, while evidence of her infidelity lay just inches away in his desk drawer. Edmund wondered if this was some elaborate manipulation, a way to assuage her guilt by going through the motions of marital reconciliation. "Where did you have in mind?" he asked, curious to see how far she would take this charade. "Scotland, perhaps. The lodge near Balmoral. We haven't been there together in years, and I thought—" She paused, seeming to struggle with her words. "I thought it might be good for us to remember what we once had." Edmund felt a bitter laugh, threatening to escape. What they once had was apparently not enough to prevent her from seeking comfort in another man's arms. But he maintained his composure, nodding as if seriously considering her proposal. "That sounds lovely, Cordelia. Let me check my schedule with James." She smiled, the expression transforming her face in a way that reminded him powerfully of the young woman he had fallen in love with 3 decades ago. For just a moment, he allowed himself to wonder if there might be some explanation for the photographs that didn't involve complete betrayal. Perhaps they were doctored after all. Perhaps there was context he wasn't seeing. But even as these desperate thoughts crossed his mind, he knew he was grasping at straws. The evidence was too comprehensive, too detailed, too real to dismiss as elaborate forgery. After Cordelia left to attend her morning appointments, Edmund retrieved the envelope and spread the photographs across his desk once more. This time, he forced himself to examine them with the detachment of a king rather than the wounded heart of a husband. If these images were indeed authentic, and if they represented ongoing blackmail rather than a one-time threat, he needed to understand exactly what he was dealing with. The technical quality of the photographs suggested professional equipment and expertise. The angles and lighting indicated the photographer had significant access to private spaces. Most troubling of all, the timestamps suggested ongoing surveillance rather than a fortunate coincidence of catching his wife and best friend in a compromising moment. Someone had been watching them. Someone had been planning this revelation. And someone now held the power to destroy everything Edmund had worked his entire life to protect. As the clock struck 10, his private phone rang. The caller ID showed only a series of numbers he didn't recognize. "Your Majesty," a smooth male voice said without preamble. "I trust you've had time to review our gift." Edmund's grip tightened on the receiver. Who was this? Someone who believes in the power of truth, Your Majesty. The question is, what are you willing to do to keep certain truths from becoming public knowledge? The game had begun. The voice on the other end of the line carried an educated accent that Edmund couldn't quite place. Cultured but not aristocratic, confident but not aggressive. It was the voice of someone accustomed to power, though perhaps not the kind that came with titles and inherited wealth. I don't negotiate with blackmailers, Edmund replied, though his voice lacked the authority he intended. Of course you don't, Your Majesty. You negotiate with businessmen who understand the value of discretion. A pause, then a soft chuckle. Shall we call it a consultation fee? Edmund's mind raced through possibilities. Who had access to both his wife and Lord Blackwood? Who could have orchestrated such extensive surveillance without detection? The Royal Protection Detail was among the best in the world, sworn to absolute loyalty and discretion. Could one of them have been compromised? What do you want? Edmund asked, abandoning pretense. At the moment, simply a conversation. Face to face. There are nuances to this situation that don't translate well over telephone lines. That's impossible. I don't meet with anonymous callers making threats. Even when those threats concern the stability of the monarchy itself. The voice carried a note of amusement. Your Majesty, we both know that these photographs represent only the tip of a very substantial iceberg. Queen Cordelia and Lord Blackwood have been remarkably thorough in documenting their relationship. Edmund felt his stomach lurch. What do you mean? Letters, Your Majesty. Emails. Voice recordings. Video footage from various private residences. Even some rather intimate diary entries from Her Majesty's personal journal. They've been quite prolific in their expressions of mutual affection. The implications hit Edmund like a physical blow. If such evidence existed, the scandal would be unprecedented in modern royal history. The monarchy had survived divorces, scandals, even abdications, but this level of documented infidelity involving the Queen and the King's closest advisor would create a crisis of legitimacy that might prove insurmountable. You have 1 hour to consider my proposal, the voice continued. I'll send a car to collect you at precisely 3 o'clock. The driver will know where to take you. Come alone, Your Majesty, or don't come at all. The line went dead. Edmund stared at the phone for several minutes, weighing his options. He could alert his security detail, trace the call, turn this into a matter for law enforcement. But doing so would almost certainly result in the very exposure he was trying to prevent. Word would leak, it always did, and by evening the entire world would know that the king was being blackmailed over his wife's affair. Alternatively, he could refuse to engage, call the blackmailer's bluff, and hope the evidence wouldn't surface. But something in that smooth, confident voice suggested this wasn't an idle threat. Whoever was behind this had planned carefully and thoroughly. They wouldn't have made contact without being prepared to follow through. At exactly 11 o'clock, Lord Blackwood arrived for his weekly briefing. Edmund watched his oldest friend enter the study with the easy familiarity of someone who had walked these halls for decades. Marcus moved with the casual confidence of a man secure in his position, greeting Edmund with the same warm smile that had characterized their friendship since their days at Eton together. Good morning, Edmund. You look tired. Everything all right? The normalcy of the interaction was surreal. Here was the man who had been sleeping with his wife for over 2 years, expressing concern for Edmund's well-being with apparent sincerity. Either Marcus was a sociopath of extraordinary skill, or he genuinely saw nothing wrong with betraying his king and best friend. Couldn't sleep, Edmund replied truthfully. Lot on my mind. Marcus settled into his usual chair and opened his briefing folder. Well, hopefully we can clear some items from your agenda today. The Australian trade delegation is confirmed for next week, and the Prime Minister wants to discuss the climate initiative before the Commonwealth Summit. As Marcus spoke, Edmund studied his face with new eyes. At 58, Marcus had aged well, maintaining the athletic build and sharp features that had made him popular with both the press and palace staff throughout his career. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his suit immaculately tailored. He looked every inch the distinguished statesman he had become. But now Edmund noticed things he had previously overlooked. The way Marcus's eyes brightened when he mentioned Cordelia's charity work. The subtle smile that played across his lips when discussing the Queen's upcoming engagements. The familiarity with which he spoke of her schedule and preferences. Speaking of the Queen, Edmund said carefully. She mentioned wanting to take a private retreat. Scotland, perhaps. Have you discussed her security requirements for such a trip? Something flickered across Marcus's face, so briefly that Edmund almost missed it. Surprise? Guilt? Disappointment? I wasn't aware she was planning any private travel, Marcus replied. But, of course, we'll arrange whatever protection she requires. Edmund nodded, filing away the reaction for later analysis. If Cordelia and Marcus were as close as the photographs suggested, wouldn't she have mentioned her retreat proposal to him? Unless, of course, the retreat was her way of extracting herself from a relationship that had become too complicated to continue. The briefing continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from upcoming state dinners to budget approvals for palace maintenance. Throughout it all, Marcus displayed the same professionalism and attention to detail that had made him invaluable as an advisor. Whatever was happening in his personal life, it hadn't affected his ability to fulfill his official duties. As Marcus prepared to leave, Edmund made a decision that surprised even himself. "Marcus," he said, "how long have we known each other?" Marcus paused in gathering his papers, looking puzzled by the question. "Since we were 12, I suppose." "Why do you ask?" 46 years. That's longer than most marriages last." Edmund moved to the window, presenting his back to his friend. "In all that time, have you ever kept anything important from me? Anything that might affect our friendship or our working relationship?" The silence stretched for so long that Edmund finally turned around. Marcus stood frozen by the desk, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly as he gripped his briefing folder. "Edmund," Marcus began, then stopped. He seemed to be struggling with some internal battle, weighing words carefully before speaking. "Is there something specific you want to ask me? I'm asking if you have anything you need to tell me. Anything at all." Marcus stared at him for a long moment, and Edmund could almost see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, Marcus straightened his shoulders and met Edmund's gaze directly. "No," he said firmly. "Nothing that would affect our friendship or my service to the crown." The lie was delivered with such conviction that Edmund almost believed it himself. But, having seen the photographs, having witnessed the evidence of Marcus's deception, he recognized the response for what it was, a calculated decision to maintain the status quo rather than confess to betrayal. "Good," Edmund replied. "I'm glad to hear it." After Marcus left, Edmund sat alone with his thoughts for nearly an hour. The dynamics of the situation were becoming clearer, but also more complex. Cordelia had proposed a romantic getaway that Marcus apparently knew nothing about, suggesting either that their relationship was cooling or that she was feeling guilt about the affair. Marcus, when given an opportunity to confess, had chosen to continue the deception, indicating either that he didn't know their secret was exposed or that he was willing to brazen it out. Most troubling of all was the question of who could have gathered such comprehensive evidence without the knowledge of either party involved. The level of access required suggested someone with intimate knowledge of both their schedules and their habits. Someone who could predict when and where they would be alone together. At precisely 2 o'clock, Edmund informed James that he would be taking a private drive and was not to be disturbed or followed. James's eyebrows rose slightly at this unusual request, but he simply nodded and confirmed that the king's personal vehicle would be ready. "Actually," Edmund said, "I'll be traveling with a driver who will be provided for me. Please inform security that I'm handling my own transportation this afternoon." This time James couldn't hide his concern. "Your Majesty, that's highly irregular. Security protocol requires." "I'm aware of the protocols, James. Today I'm choosing to ignore them." At exactly 3 o'clock, a sleek black sedan pulled through the palace gates. The driver, a professionally dressed woman in her 30s, stepped out and approached the main entrance. Within minutes, Edmund found himself in the back seat of the car, watching the familiar landmarks of London slide past his window. The driver maintained complete silence during the 40-minute journey through increasingly unfamiliar neighborhoods. They eventually arrived at an elegant Georgian townhouse in Belgravia, the kind of address that whispered of old money and careful discretion. Edmund was escorted to a beautifully appointed library where afternoon tea had been laid out on a mahogany table. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves surrounded comfortable leather chairs positioned near a fireplace where logs crackled warmly despite the mild weather outside. "Your Majesty," a voice said from behind him. "Thank you for coming." Edmund turned to face his blackmailer for the first time. The man who rose from behind the antique writing desk was not what Edmund had expected. Perhaps 60 years old, with distinguished silver hair and the kind of understated elegance that suggested wealth without ostentation. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to command. Most surprising of all, Edmund recognized him. "Sir William Hartwell," Edmund said, his voice betraying none of his shock. "I should have known." Sir William smiled. an expression that managed to be both warm and predatory simultaneously. "Please, sit down, Your Majesty. We have much to discuss." Edmund remained standing, his mind racing through the implications of this revelation. Sir William Hartwell was one of Britain's most successful media moguls, owner of 3 major newspapers, 2 television networks, and a digital empire that reached millions of people daily. He was also someone who had been conspicuously absent from recent palace garden parties and state dinners, though Edmund couldn't recall any specific falling out between them. "I suppose I should ask what this is about," Edmund said, finally, settling into one of the leather chairs. "Though I suspect it's not simply about my wife's indiscretions." "Oh, but it is, Your Majesty, though perhaps not in the way you might think." Sir William poured tea with the practiced ease of someone comfortable with social rituals. "Tell me, what do you know about the proposed Media Consolidation Act that's currently making its way through Parliament?" Edmund frowned. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything as it happens. You see, the act would effectively limit my ability to expand my media holdings in this country. Rather inconvenient for someone in my position." Sir William handed Edmund a delicate china cup. "Your government has been remarkably resistant to my suggestions for modification. So you're blackmailing me to influence legislation? That's a rather extreme approach, even for you." "Not blackmail, Your Majesty. Leverage. There's an important distinction." Sir William settled back in his chair, completely at ease despite the gravity of their conversation. "You see, I've spent considerable time and resources documenting Queen Cordelia's relationship with Lord Blackwood, not for any salacious purpose, but because I recognized the potential value of such information. You had them followed, photographed, recorded. I had them observed by professionals who understand discretion. The documentation was quite thorough, I'm afraid. Hotels in Paris, a cottage in the Cotswolds, even Lord Blackwood's London flat. They were remarkably careless about covering their tracks." Edmund felt sick. The scope of the surveillance suggested months of planning and significant financial investment. This wasn't opportunistic blackmail. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign. "What exactly are you proposing?" Edmund asked. "Simple. Your Majesty exercises his considerable influence to ensure the Media Consolidation Act dies quietly in committee. In return, the documentation of the Queen's affair remains private. Everyone gets what they want. And if I refuse?" Sir William's smile never wavered. "Then, by tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in Europe will have copies of the complete dossier. The photographs, the recorded conversations, the hotel receipts, the love letters. All of it authenticated and verified by independent experts." Edmund stared into his teacup, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. The choice before him was stark: compromise his integrity by interfering with the democratic process, or watch his marriage and the monarchy itself be torn apart by scandal. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" he asked. "What's to stop you from releasing everything anyway, once you get what you want?" "Because, Your Majesty, I'm a businessman, not an anarchist. Destroying the monarchy would ultimately be bad for my business interests. Britain's stability depends on institutional continuity, and I have significant investments in that stability." Sir William leaned forward slightly. "Besides, this particular leverage only works once. If I use it now, I lose the ability to use it again in the future." The implication was chilling. Sir William wasn't just seeking a one-time concession. He was positioning himself for ongoing influence over royal decision-making. "You've thought this through very carefully," Edmund observed. "I've had time to consider all the angles. Your wife and Lord Blackwood have been providing me with material for quite some time now." Edmund looked up sharply. "How long have you known about the affair?" "Nearly from the beginning." Lord Blackwood was surprisingly indiscreet in his communications. A few well-placed sources, some carefully monitored electronic surveillance, and the picture became quite clear. Sir William paused to sip his tea. "I must say, they do seem genuinely fond of each other. It's not simply physical attraction. There appears to be real emotional attachment involved." The casual cruelty of this observation hit Edmund harder than any of the photographs had. Not only had his wife been unfaithful, but she had apparently found with another man the emotional connection that had been missing from their marriage for years. "Why Lord Blackwood?" Edmund asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "I suspect you'd have to ask the Queen that question. Though if I were to speculate, I'd say it has something to do with his availability and attention. Lord Blackwood has made himself remarkably accessible to Her Majesty over the past few years." Edmund thought back over recent months, remembering the increasing frequency of Marcus's presence at informal family gatherings. He had attributed it to Marcus's dedication to duty, never considering that his friend might have ulterior motives for spending time at the palace. How many people know about this? Edmund asked. Currently, myself, my head of security who supervised the documentation, and a technology specialist who handled the electronic surveillance. All of them are bound by extremely comprehensive non-disclosure agreements and have significant financial incentives to maintain confidentiality. And the Queen and Lord Blackwood? Do they know they've been exposed? Not yet, though that could change very quickly if circumstances require it. Edmund set down his teacup with more force than necessary, causing it to rattle against the saucer. This is unconscionable. You're destroying lives for business advantage. I'm not destroying anything, Your Majesty. I'm simply revealing what already exists. Your wife chose to have an affair. Lord Blackwood chose to betray his oldest friend. I'm merely the messenger who's offering you a chance to control how that message is delivered. By compromising my integrity and interfering with Parliament. By recognizing the practical realities of modern governance. Kings have been influencing legislation since the concept of monarchy was invented. I'm just asking you to be somewhat more direct about it than usual. Edmund stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet Belgravia street. Ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, blissfully unaware that the future of their monarchy was being negotiated in the elegant room behind him. I need time to think, he said finally. Of course. You have until midnight tomorrow. After that, I'll assume you've chosen to let events take their natural course. The drive back to the palace passed in a blur of conflicted thoughts. Edmund found himself analyzing every aspect of the situation, searching for alternatives that didn't exist. He could expose Sir William's blackmail attempt, but doing so would inevitably lead to exposure of the evidence that made the blackmail effective. He could confront Cordelia and Marcus directly, but that would accomplish nothing except confirming what he already knew while potentially making the situation worse. By the time he reached his study, Edmund had reached an uncomfortable conclusion. He was trapped by circumstances entirely beyond his control, forced to choose between his personal integrity and his duty to protect the institution he had sworn to serve. The irony was bitter. For decades, he had prided himself on being a constitutional monarch who stayed above politics, who influenced through example rather than interference. Now he was being asked to abandon those principles to protect a marriage that had been a lie and a monarchy built on secrets and deception. As evening approached, Cordelia appeared in his study doorway, still radiant in the way that had attracted him to her 30 years ago. Edmund, you missed dinner. I was worried about you. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since receiving the photographs that morning. She was 53 years old, but could have passed for 10 years younger. Her auburn hair was still rich and lustrous, her skin clear and smooth, her figure maintained through careful diet and regular exercise. She remained one of the most photographed women in the world, a fashion icon and symbol of grace under pressure. But now he saw things he had missed before. The way she held herself with a confidence that hadn't been there in their early years of marriage. The subtle glow that he had attributed to good health, but might actually have been the radiance of a woman in love. The small smile that seemed to play constantly at the corners of her mouth, as if she carried some delightful secret. I had some business to attend to, he said. Nothing urgent. She approached his desk, and he caught a hint of her perfume. Something new, something he didn't recognize. How many other small changes had he failed to notice because he wasn't paying attention? Are you sure you're all right? You seem distant tonight. Just tired. He lied, wondering if she could see through his deception as easily as he now saw through hers. She lingered for a moment, as if wanting to say something more, then seemed to think better of it. Well, don't work too late. You need your rest. After she left, Edmund opened his desk drawer and removed the photographs once more. In the soft light of his desk lamp, they seemed even more damning than they had that morning. But now he found himself studying them for different details. The genuine happiness on Cordelia's face, the tender way Marcus looked at her, the comfortable intimacy that spoke of deep emotional connection rather than mere physical attraction. Sir William had been right about one thing. This wasn't simply an affair. What Edmund was looking at was evidence of a love story that had bloomed in the shadow of his own failed marriage. The question that would keep him awake for the remainder of the night was whether that love story was worth destroying to save his own pride and preserve the illusion of royal stability. Edmund barely slept that night, his mind cycling through increasingly desperate scenarios. By dawn, He had reached a decision that would have been unthinkable just 24 hours earlier. He needed to know the complete truth, not just Sir William's carefully curated version of events, before he could determine his next course of action. At 7 o'clock sharp, he summoned Lord Blackwood to an emergency meeting. When Marcus arrived, slightly breathless and clearly concerned about the unusual early morning summons, Edmund was ready for him. "Close the door, Marcus. We need to talk." Something in Edmund's tone must have alerted Marcus to the gravity of the situation. He shut the door carefully and took his usual seat, but his posture was more tense than usual, his eyes watchful. "Marcus," Edmund began, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to give me an honest answer. Are you having an affair with my wife?" The color drained from Marcus's face so completely that Edmund thought he might faint. For several long moments, neither man spoke. Marcus's hands gripped the arms of his chair so tightly that his knuckles went white, and Edmund could see the rapid pulse beating at his temple. "Edmund," Marcus finally whispered, "Yes or no, Marcus? It's a simple question." Marcus closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were filled with a mixture of guilt, defiance, and something that might have been relief. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, I am." Edmund had known this moment was coming, had prepared himself for it, but the actual confirmation still hit him like a physical blow. Hearing the words spoken aloud made the betrayal real in a way that even the photographs hadn't accomplished. "How long?" Edmund asked, his voice remarkably steady considering the turmoil he felt inside. 2 years and 3 months, Marcus replied. Then, seemed to catch himself. "Edmund, you have to understand. 2 years and 3 months, Edmund repeated. "That's very precise. I know exactly when it started because it changed everything for me. For both of us." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes pleading for understanding. "It wasn't planned. It wasn't something either of us wanted to happen. But it did happen. Repeatedly. For over 2 years. Yes." Edmund stood and walked to his window, needing to put some distance between himself and his oldest friend. Outside, the palace grounds were coming to life with the morning shift change. Guards in their crisp uniforms moved through their precise routines. Gardeners tended to flower beds that would be photographed by tourists later in the day, and staff members hurried along paths worn smooth by centuries of royal footsteps. "Tell me how it started," Edmund said without turning around. Marcus was quiet for so long that Edmund finally looked back at him. His friend, former friend, was staring at his hands, seemingly lost in memory. "The Children's Hospital Charity Gala," Marcus said finally. 2 years ago last January. You had that diplomatic crisis with the German ambassador and couldn't attend at the last minute. Cordelia was devastated because she'd worked so hard organizing everything. And you? What? You barely apologized. You just told her duty came first and left it at that. She cried in the car on the way to the gala. Not pretty tears, real, heartbroken sobbing. She felt abandoned. Edmund remembered the crisis Marcus was referring to. A diplomatic incident that had required immediate attention and had indeed forced him to cancel his attendance at Cordelia's charity event. But he hadn't realized how deeply his absence had affected her. "So you comforted her," Edmund said. "I tried to. She was so beautiful that night, and so sad. And she kept apologizing for crying and ruining her makeup. She said she felt invisible, like her work didn't matter to anyone, like she was just an ornament that got moved around for photo opportunities." Marcus's voice grew softer. "I told her she mattered to me, that her work was important and valuable, and that I was proud of her. And then? Nothing happened that night. But something changed between us. She started asking for my opinion on her projects, my advice on her speeches. We began meeting more frequently to discuss her schedule. And gradually," Marcus trailed off. "Gradually you fell in love with her." "We fell in love with each other," Marcus corrected. "Edmund, I've been in love with Cordelia since the day you introduced us 30 years ago. But she was yours, and you were my best friend, and I buried those feelings so deeply I almost convinced myself they didn't exist." This revelation struck Edmund harder than the confirmation of the affair itself. 30 years. I was the one who told you to pursue her, remember? When you met her at the charity function and couldn't stop talking about her for weeks afterward. I encouraged you to court her because I could see how happy she made you. And because I knew I could never have her. Marcus finally looked up, meeting Edmund's eyes directly. "I thought that supporting your happiness was the closest I could come to my own." Edmund did remember. Marcus had indeed been enthusiastic about his relationship with Cordelia from the very beginning, offering advice on where to take her, what gifts she might appreciate, how to navigate the complexities of introducing a commoner to royal life. Edmund had attributed this support to friendship and loyalty, never considering that it might have been motivated by Marcus's own feelings for her. And now? Edmund asked. What do you want to happen now? I don't know, Marcus admitted. We've talked about it endlessly, but there's no good answer. Cordelia feels guilty about betraying you, but she also can't deny that she's happier than she's been in years. She loves you, Edmund, but she's not in love with you. She hasn't been for a long time. The honesty of this statement was both devastating and strangely liberating. Edmund had suspected for years that Cordelia's feelings for him had cooled, but he had attributed it to the natural evolution of a long marriage rather than the absence of genuine romantic love. Does she want a divorce? Edmund asked. She's terrified of what it would mean for the monarchy, for your children, for her public role. She spent 27 years building a life as your queen, and the thought of losing all of that is overwhelming. Marcus paused, then added quietly, but she's also terrified of spending the rest of her life pretending to be happy in a marriage that feels empty to her. Edmund returned to his desk and sat down heavily. The situation was even more complex than he had realized. This wasn't simply a matter of adultery that could be resolved through divorce or reconciliation. 3 lives had become impossibly entangled, and any solution would require devastating sacrifices from at least one of them. Marcus, he said, I need to ask you something else, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Has anyone approached you about this relationship? Anyone offering money for information or threatening exposure? Marcus frowned. No, nothing like that. Why would you ask? So Marcus had no idea that their affair had been documented and was being used as leverage against the crown. This added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. No reason, Edmund lied. Just concerned about security. At 10 o'clock, Edmund met with Cordelia in the small sitting room adjacent to her private apartments. He had chosen the location carefully. It was where they had often talked during the early years of their marriage, when conversation had flowed easily between them, and when they had shared their hopes and fears without reservation. Cordelia was arranging flowers from the palace gardens when he entered, her movements graceful and precise as she created an arrangement that would have impressed professional florists. She looked up with a smile that faded quickly when she saw his expression. Edmund, is something wrong? Sit down, Cordelia. Please. She set down the flowers and settled into one of the chintz-covered chairs, her hands folded in her lap in a gesture he recognized as her way of preparing for difficult conversations. I know about Marcus, he said simply. The effect of his words was immediate and dramatic. Cordelia's face went white, her hands began to tremble, and she seemed to shrink into herself as if trying to disappear entirely. Edmund, she whispered, I can explain, no explanations. Not yet. I just need to know if you love him. The question seemed to surprise her. She had clearly prepared for anger, accusations, demands for justification. But the simple inquiry about her feelings left her momentarily speechless. Do you love him? Edmund repeated. Tears began to flow down her cheeks, but she nodded. Yes, I love him very much. And do you love me? She was crying harder now, but she managed to speak through her tears. I love you, Edmund. I will always love you. But I'm not in love with you anymore. I haven't been for years, and I think you know that. Edmund felt a strange sense of relief mixed with profound sadness. At least now they were being honest with each other. How long have you known? Cordelia asked. Since yesterday morning. Someone sent me photographs. Cordelia's tears stopped abruptly, replaced by a look of horror. Photographs? What kind of photographs? The kind that prove you and Marcus have been having an affair for over 2 years. Oh God, she whispered. Edmund, who has them? What do they want? So she immediately understood the implications, as he had known she would. Cordelia had survived nearly 3 decades as queen by being intelligent and politically astute. She would recognize the potential for blackmail and scandal immediately. That's not important right now, Edmund said, though he made a mental note of her reaction. What's important is deciding what we're going to do about this situation. What do you want to do? She asked quietly. Edmund studied his wife's face, noting the way fear and guilt warred with defiance and hope in her expression. She was terrified of the consequences of exposure, but he could also see that part of her was relieved that the pretense was finally over. I want you to be happy, he said, surprising them both. I want all of us to find a way through this that doesn't destroy everything we've worked to build. Fresh tears began flowing down Cordelia's cheeks, but these seemed to be tears of gratitude rather than fear. "Is that possible?" she asked. "Can we really find a way through this that doesn't end in disaster?" "I don't know," Edmund admitted. "But I think we have to try." That afternoon, Edmund called Sir William Hartwell and requested another meeting. This time, when he arrived at the Belgravia townhouse, he came armed with more than just desperation. "Your Majesty," Sir William greeted him warmly. "I trust you've had time to consider my proposal." "I have," Edmund replied. "And I have a counterproposal for you." Sir William raised an eyebrow, but gestured for Edmund to continue. "You want the Media Consolidation Act to disappear. I want your evidence against my wife and Lord Blackwood to disappear. But I have something else you might want even more." "Which is?" Edmund smiled for the first time in days. "Exclusive rights to the story of how we resolve this situation." Sir William leaned back in his leather chair, his expression shifting from confident amusement to intrigued calculation. "I'm listening, Your Majesty." "You're a media mogul," Edmund continued. "What's more valuable to you? One piece of leverage that you can only use once, or the exclusive rights to the biggest royal story of the century?" "That depends entirely on what kind of story we're discussing." Edmund had spent the previous evening crafting this proposal, recognizing that Sir William was fundamentally a businessman who understood the value of exceptional content. The voluntary modernization of the monarchy. A king who chooses to adapt royal traditions to contemporary realities, rather than being forced to by scandal. "You're proposing to get ahead of the story?" "I'm proposing to control the story. Instead of having an affair exposed, we announce a mutual decision to modernize royal marriage. Instead of messy divorce proceedings, we create a new model for royal relationships that acknowledges the difference between personal happiness and institutional duty." Sir William was quiet for several minutes, his sharp mind obviously working through the implications. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "A formal separation that allows both myself and Cordelia to pursue personal happiness while maintaining our official roles. She remains queen, I remain king, but we acknowledge that our personal relationship has evolved into a deep friendship and partnership focused on service rather than romance." "And Lord Blackwood retires from his official position, but maintains a relationship with the Queen that is acknowledged and accepted rather than hidden and scandalous." Sir William stood and moved to the window, looking out at the London street while he processed this unprecedented proposition. "The public reaction would be massive," Edmund agreed, "which is why it would require very careful management by someone with experience in shaping public opinion. Someone with access to multiple media platforms and an understanding of how to present complex stories in ways that the public can accept." "You're offering me the exclusive rights to manage this story?" "I'm offering you the opportunity to be part of history rather than simply documenting it. Help us create a new model for modern monarchy, and you'll have unlimited access to every aspect of the process." Edmund could see the wheels turning in Sir William's mind. The media mogul was clearly recognizing the unprecedented nature of what was being proposed. Not just a royal scandal, but a revolutionary approach to royal marriage that could set new precedents for generations. "What guarantees do I have that you'll follow through?" Sir William asked. "What guarantees do I have that you'll keep your word about destroying the evidence?" They stared at each other across the elegant room. Two powerful men recognizing that they were negotiating terms that would affect far more than just their own interests. "I'll need editorial control," Sir William said finally. "You'll have consultation rights and exclusive access. Editorial control remains with the palace communications team." "Not acceptable. If I'm going to stake my reputation on managing this story, I need to ensure it's handled properly. Then, we need a third party we both trust to make final editorial decisions." They spent another hour negotiating the details, but gradually the framework of an agreement emerged. Sir William would destroy all evidence of Cordelia's affair and would never reference it publicly. In return, he would receive exclusive media rights to the story of the royal family's modernization, including interviews, behind-the-scenes access, and the right to publish a comprehensive account of the process. More importantly, he would serve as the primary architect of the public relations campaign that would introduce this unprecedented change to the British people and the world. When Edmund returned to the palace that evening, he found Cordelia and Marcus waiting for him in his study. They sat on opposite sides of the room, their body language carefully neutral, but Edmund could sense the tension between them. "I've spoken with Sir William," Edmund announced. "I believe we have a path forward." For the next hour, He outlined the proposal he had negotiated. Cordelia and Marcus listened in stunned silence as he described a future where their relationship could exist openly, while the monarchy adapted to accommodate modern realities about marriage, love, and personal happiness. You would do that? Cordelia asked when he finished. You would revolutionize the monarchy rather than simply divorce me. I would do what's best for all of us and for the institution we serve, Edmund replied. A messy divorce and scandal would damage the monarchy for decades. But a thoughtful evolution that acknowledges changing social attitudes about marriage could actually strengthen public support by showing that the royal family is capable of adapting to contemporary values. Marcus had remained silent throughout most of the conversation, but now he leaned forward. Edmund, this is incredibly generous, but are you sure you've thought through all the implications? The constitutional questions alone will be complex, but manageable, Edmund finished. The Queen's role is largely ceremonial anyway. Whether she's romantically involved with me or with you doesn't change her ability to fulfill her official duties. But the precedent will show that the monarchy is evolving rather than becoming obsolete. Marcus, society's attitudes toward marriage have changed dramatically in the past 50 years. People understand that relationships are complex, that love isn't always permanent, and that personal happiness matters. If we handle this correctly, we could actually increase public support by showing that we're human beings dealing with human problems in a mature and responsible way. Cordelia was crying again, but these were tears of relief and gratitude. Edmund, I don't know how to thank you. This is more than I ever dared hope for. Don't thank me yet, Edmund warned. This will only work if all three of us are completely committed to making it successful. The public scrutiny will be intense, the criticism will be harsh, and there will be people who never accept this arrangement. We'll need to present a united front and demonstrate that this decision was made thoughtfully and with consideration for everyone involved. Over the following weeks, the three of them worked closely with Sir William and a team of communications experts to develop a comprehensive strategy for announcing and implementing their decision. Every detail was carefully planned, from the timing of the announcement to the specific language that would be used to describe the new arrangement. The key was framing the story as a positive evolution rather than a scandal or failure. They would emphasize the mutual respect and continued friendship between Edmund and Cordelia, the thoughtful consideration that had gone into the decision, and the commitment all three of them felt to their public roles and responsibilities. Marcus would resign from his official position as the king's advisor, but would take on a new role as director of international relations for Cordelia's charitable foundation. This would provide him with legitimate reasons to travel with the Queen and participate in official functions, while maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. Cordelia would continue to fulfill all her official duties as queen, but would live in separate quarters within the palace and would be free to pursue her personal relationship with Marcus openly. Edmund would take on a more active public role, demonstrating that the arrangement had enhanced rather than diminished his ability to serve as monarch. The announcement was carefully timed to coincide with the beginning of summer, when public attention might be somewhat less intense due to vacation schedules and lighter news cycles. Sir William's media outlets led the coverage, presenting the story as a mature and forward-thinking approach to modern monarchy that demonstrated the royal family's understanding of contemporary social values. The initial reaction was indeed intense, with opinions ranging from admiration for their honesty and maturity to harsh criticism of their perceived abandonment of traditional values. But, as weeks turned to months, public opinion gradually shifted toward acceptance and even approval. Polls showed that younger demographics were particularly supportive of the arrangement, viewing it as evidence that the monarchy could evolve with the times rather than remaining trapped in outdated conventions. Older demographics were more critical, but even among traditionalists, there was grudging respect for the way the situation had been handled openly and honestly rather than through scandal and deception. 6 months after the announcement, Edmund stood once again at the window of his study, looking out at the palace grounds where tourists gathered daily to catch a glimpse of royal life. The crowds were actually larger than they had been before the separation, drawn by curiosity about how the new arrangement was working. Cordelia appeared in his doorway, as she had countless times over their nearly 3 decades together. But now there was a lightness in her bearing that hadn't been there for years, a genuine contentment that transformed her entire presence. The Australian trade delegation went well, she reported. And The Prime Minister wanted me to tell you that the climate initiative has received overwhelming support from the Commonwealth nations. Good, Edmund replied. And how are you? How are things with Marcus? She smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. We're happy, Edmund. Really happy. And grateful every day for the choice you made. It wasn't just my choice, he reminded her. We all chose to try something different. Yes, but you were the one with the most to lose. You could have chosen anger and divorce and conventional scandal. Instead, you chose to imagine a different way forward. Edmund nodded, recognizing the truth in her words. The past months had been challenging in ways none of them had anticipated, but they had also been liberating. For the first time in years, all three of them were living authentically rather than maintaining elaborate pretenses. Any regrets? Cordelia asked softly. Edmund considered the question seriously. His marriage was over, his oldest friendship had been fundamentally changed, and he had voluntarily revolutionized one of the world's oldest institutions based on a blackmail threat that few people would ever know about. But he was no longer trapped in a loveless marriage. His wife was genuinely happy for the first time in years, and the monarchy had emerged stronger and more relevant than it had been in decades. Most surprisingly of all, he found himself looking forward to the future with anticipation rather than dread. No, he said finally. No regrets. Sir William had gotten his story, though it had turned out to be quite different from what any of them had originally envisioned. Instead of documenting the destruction of a royal marriage, he had chronicled its transformation into something unprecedented in modern royal history. His exclusive coverage had won international awards and had positioned his media empire as the definitive source for royal coverage. More importantly, the arrangement had achieved something none of them had dared hope for when they first began negotiating: genuine happiness for everyone involved. Cordelia had found the love and emotional fulfillment she had been missing. Marcus had discovered that his feelings were returned and could be expressed openly. And Edmund had freed himself from the burden of a failed marriage while strengthening his position as a forward-thinking monarch. The blackmail that had threatened to destroy them had instead become the catalyst for creating something entirely new: a modern royal family that acknowledged the complexity of human relationships while maintaining their commitment to public service. As evening fell over London, Edmund reflected on the unexpected turns that life could take. 6 months ago, he had been a king trapped by circumstance, forced to choose between personal integrity and institutional loyalty. Now, he was a king who had chosen to transcend those limitations entirely, creating new possibilities that no one had previously imagined. The future remained uncertain, as it always did. There would be new challenges, new crises, new opportunities to choose between tradition and innovation. But Edmund felt confident that he had learned something valuable from this experience. Sometimes the most courageous choice is not to fight against change, but to embrace it completely and use it to create something better than what existed before. The crown's shadow had lifted, replaced by a new kind of light that illuminated possibilities rather than concealing truths. And in that light, all three of them had found their way to something that looked remarkably like a happy ending.